So I've been pondering, a while ago, Venerable Children said, she said this many times, that the Lamrim and the Lojong are the fundamental practices here at the Abbey. And I've been thinking more about this as I watch myself, how I work with problems as they arise, or what I have labeled as problems, really thinking, just seeing how it's not so helpful and how I want to improve, or how I can see that the teachings can guide me to transform in that way. And so I've asked myself, like, how do I see problems? And thinking of just looking at the definition of what a problem is, it's something that we don't want, it's something to be pushed away, it's something to be overcome, as unwanted hardship, it's unwelcome, and it's harmful. And then I've seen in my few years of living at the Abbey how there's this naivety that comes up as well, where, but I'm trying to do good things, I'm trying to be a nice person, so why do I still have problems? I'm trying to practice the Dharma, and I'm trying to create merit, so then what's going on? Why do I keep hitting what I feel to be hitting these walls where either I'm not so well at controlling my mind, or external situations come up that are not so conducive, what I feel is conducive for my practice, or just take unnecessary time and energy. And so while we receive a lot of teachings here on the Lamrim and thought transformation, I've kind of come to the conclusion that a lot of it has been, I nod my head, yes, that sounds good in theory, and I'm not putting it into practice so much. Because when problems arise, I feel frustrated, angry, and often confused. There's resistance to what I don't want or what I don't expect. And there's a lot of blaming, kind of blaming someone else for the external situation, or even blaming others for my internal response. I'm angry because you said this, because you asked me to do this, because you didn't thank me for this. It's a lot of external. And then I also look outside myself for the solution as well, trying to fiddle with the externals as opposed to looking inside. So there's not much, there's more, but there's not much of thinking things like, well, I only experience what I created the cause for. Or no matter what's going on outside of myself, I have a choice about how I respond. Oh, wow, this is really hard. How can I respond in a way that's compassionate for myself and for others? And so I've been just thinking about this, and I thought to share this kind of 3 main points that I see as important, where I see a pathway forward to changing how I'm relating to my problems, or to the idea of what problems are. So maybe this is helpful. The first idea is working with expectations, because I really see within myself the expectation that things are going to be easy. And when things are not easy, I'm just surprised. But how realistic is this in samsara? And in his commentary to the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, I think called Peacock in the Poison Grove, Geshe Sopa says that even if we strive to do only what is right, not to harm any sentient being and to work for their benefit, we must expect to meet many hardships, which we should, and I would say here, which we can, look at as opportunities to practice patience. And then in Words of My Perfect Teacher, Patrul Rinpoche says a very similar idea, where he says that even if you have not accumulated negative actions during this present life, you cannot know the extent of all the actions you have accumulated in samsara with no beginning, or even imagine their effects which you still have to experience. There are therefore people who, although they now divert themselves entirely to virtue and the practice of emptiness, are nevertheless beset by sufferings. The effect of their actions that would otherwise have remained dormant and later, so in future lives, would have resulted in rebirth in the lower realms, surfaces now because of the antidotes they are applying, and then it ripens in this life. So that really asks me to, not that I'm devoting myself entirely to virtue in the practice of emptiness, but this reframes the situation to actually look at the problems that I'm experiencing as potentially, if I view it this way, precisely because of practicing, purifying, applying antidotes, and that during the hard work of practice, the negative karma ripens. That could have ripened in a much more difficult situation in the future. And so, yeah, we have these experiences now where negative feelings, mental and physical, are ripening. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. And then in Words of My Perfect Teacher, he references the Dhammapada Sutra, or the Vajrapada Sutra, which says, Bodhisattvas practicing transcendental wisdom will be tormented. Indeed, they will be greatly tormented by past actions that would have brought suffering in future lives, but have ripened in this life instead. And it was interesting when I read this to note the sense of relief that I felt. Not relief that in the future I will be greatly tormented, but the idea that, oh yeah, I'm in samsara, what am I really expecting? That until I'm a Buddha, problems are going to arise. And so now is the opportunity to train myself in how I'm responding to these so that I can transform them into the path to awakening. And so the second idea I've been thinking about is that the purpose is not happiness right now. Of practicing the path is not happiness in this life. And that's such a mind stretch, because I would not have agreed with this, I think, when I first met the Dharma. What was most apparent for me was the sense of relief of meeting a philosophy that made some sense, that actually gave some answers to some long-time questions that I had about the purpose of life. And I experienced joy and happiness about seeing just small positive benefits of applying the antidotes to the afflictions. It's like, oh, so it seemed that this happiness right here and now was the purpose. This Buddhahood that I didn't really understand so much was kind of out there, but the happiness from practicing right now, that seemed to be it. Whereas now, having learned a bit more and had many kind teachers remind that the view is much bigger than this, just this one life. The happiness right now is to remind myself again and again, it's not the focus. And Venerable Kadro said this quite beautifully in her, I'll do a small plug here, for her ongoing teachings on mind training like Rays of the Sun, this series she's doing for the Singaporeans. You can find the playlist on our YouTube channel, where she said, the more we understand the Four Truths, the more we understand that we have a lot of work to do. Then we understand that there will be problems on the path as long as we have not attained higher realizations. We also understand that the purpose of Dharma is not to have happiness here and now. If that is our priority, wanting to feel good right now and to have a comfortable life, that is worldly Dharma. If we find ourselves being surprised when problems arise, it is helpful to review the initial and middle scope of the Lamrim, to see the situation we're in samsara, that problems will continue to happen. And again, I find relief arising thinking about this again, because if happiness right now was the goal, meaning happiness, meaning constant comfort, ease, getting what I want, I have daily reminders that that's just not going to happen. I daily, just looking at my own mind and then also the situation of the world, because I have unpleasant feelings arising all throughout the day that I have no control over. I have control over how I respond to them, but not them arising. And then I meet with what I don't want. What I want gets taken away. And then I work really hard for something and it just doesn't quite work out how I want it. And then we have this world stage right now that is just a great example of the sufferings that come from unruly minds overrun by greed, hatred, and ignorance, and the harm that comes from it. So if happiness in this life right now is the focus, that's just not a happy-making goal. So then to broaden that perspective, to see future human rebirths, a string of precious human lives, and Buddhahood as the actual goals of practice. With that in mind, there's much more space and enthusiasm to try and see problems or difficulties, these situations in which my initial response is, I don't want this is hard, get it away. There's more enthusiasm to try and see them in a different way so that I don't get so upset, so that they don't interfere with my Dharma practice because I'm ruminating about this problem when I sit down to try and meditate. But they actually fuel my practice and help me get closer to enlightenment. And so the third point that I've been thinking about largely due to Vemokadru's teachings is applying meditation immediately at every opportunity, which is one of the points in the 7-point mind training that she's been teaching on. And so how do we do that? How do we apply meditation immediately at every opportunity so we can transform adversity into the path? And there's a few analogies I'll just touch on. And one is from the Salato Sutra about the arrow. How when we have suffering, it's like being shot in the chest with an arrow. And that's one suffering. And then how we respond to that, we can respond to it in one way, where we basically shoot ourselves with a second, third, fourth, or fifth arrow in terms of how we respond to it in an afflicted way. I don't want this. Get it out. Or whatever. We all each have our own flavor about how we respond to our problems and getting angry, pity parties, kvetching. So when we do that, the Salato Sutra says, then we are joining ourselves with suffering and stress. I find that kind of imagery very powerful, and that we're actually, by responding in that way, we're shooting us up with a second or third arrow, and we are joining ourselves with suffering and stress by identifying with it so much and wrestling with it. Whereas there's another option where we don't have to shoot ourselves with another arrow, but we can have space and choose how we can respond. And in that way, we are disjoined from suffering and stress. And that we can rather use the problems that we're experiencing to reflect on the Dharma, renunciation, compassion, the emptiness of the situation in various other ways. And then there's the analogy of the lotus growing out of the mud. That is exactly through being situated in the mess that we then can have the circumstances, the fuel to perfect ourselves and become awakened. And that we can see our diverse circumstances as the compost that can fertilize our inner garden of good qualities. Again, because we learn to develop fortitude in the face of difficulty, compassion, seeing that others are in the exact same situation, if not worse than we are. And also humility when we see how our minds initially respond, and that we actually have quite a long way to go in terms of the path. And just to humble ourselves and rededicate ourselves to the practice. And there was one thing that quite caught my attention I want to explore more, is the idea also that we can see our problems as a way to increase our refuge and determination to follow the teachings. And so just thinking about how can I increase my refuge when I encounter problems? And it's like, well, what other response actually works? Retaliation is a dead end. That's 100% guaranteed suffering. Self-pity and giving up, which I probably more lean to, is also equally a dead end. It's not going to do anything. It just annoys various other people. We can pretend the problem doesn't exist, and that just makes it worse because it just festers and continues while we stick our head in the sand. We might expect someone else, usually without telling them, that they're going to fix it, and then again get angry when they don't, and the problem also festers. Or we can turn to the three jewels. We can come back to the Buddhist worldview, where we only experience what we created the cause for, not in a punishment way, but just clearly, I experienced this because I created the causes. What can I do then in the future to not experience the same thing again? And we can come back to that whatever arises, I have the choice about how I respond. It's not always easy, and I might be in the middle of responding in an afflicted way, but even then I can change it. And we can come back to the bigger picture that in the schema of multiple lifetimes I'm working towards awakening, this thing probably isn't as big as I'm feeling it is right now. And even if the problem is serious and deeply saddening, like the devastation, the loss of many lives and suffering from COVID, or the ongoing racial violence in this country and in others, again, we can take refuge in the four truths. That yes, there is suffering and there's a cause, and by practicing the path, causes for that can be overcome, and we and everyone else can be liberated from this and attain a deep and lasting happiness. So we can use that situation to fuel our renunciation, the determination to be free, and also our bodhicitta. I found this exploration of what is a problem helpful. And when I was looking up the definition and then the etymology of the word, apparently It comes from late Middle English, where it originally denoted a riddle or a question for academic discussion. So not exactly how we hold it now. In maths, I think it's viewed that way, but not colloquially. So yeah, we might have our initial reaction to a situation with aversion, overwhelm, disbelief, anger, and everything else. But to try and bring the mind back to the Dharma and to use the situation to grow our love, compassion, and so on. And to perhaps see the situation as a riddle in terms of what affliction is present in my mind right now that is disturbing me so much? And what antidotes can I apply? And if this initial antidote doesn't work, then what's another one that I can apply? And to work from there. And I think most importantly as well, to rejoice that we actually have met a path in some skillful teachers that have taught us, that have given us the tools, that we actually have a way to transform adversity into the path.